I'm Marianne Rigaud, and I'm a training director at samsa.fr. I'm replacing Beatrice, unfortunately, he couldn't be here. So the three speakers here with us for this hour that we have together now. I'm sorry, I won't be able to pronounce your name properly in Arabic, and she said that if you pronounce it wrong, it turns into an insult. So I'll say Rama. Rahma. Okay, Rahma. Rahma, dear, you're a journalist. You're a trainer yourself, and you also set up Climate School in July 21. The second anniversary now of this school. You'll give us a few figures, I'm sure. And I think you were also involved in the Climate Tracker initiative that you'll be telling us about. And then we've got Martha Kra Akisi. You're a journalist from Côte d'Ivoire. You are a presenter, reporter on television. Yes, I am. And here we've got Isham Hudaifi, editor and journalist. You're a writer. You're a trainer. Training concerning investigative journalism. You're Moroccan. That's several roles to play. Thank you for being with us. Now we'll be talking of injustice, environmental injustice. Isham, so tell us what that is. What is inequality from the environmental point of view? Well, an environmental inequality are environmental challenges which have an impact on people's lives. For instance, migration, internal migration. For instance, when there's a penury of water resources, or like in Morocco, you've got children who drop out of school because water is scarce, and so you need people to go and fetch the water. All that labor comes from the children. So it's this kind of social injustice that I call environmental injustice and inequality. And that's typical of a real environmental problem. And the entire challenge lies in relating this global warming to people's lives and what it really means on a daily basis on their incomes, their health, their family stability, and in other kinds of social injustices that arise because of the environmental challenges and problems. All three of you, with your different projects, initiatives, and reportings, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Morocco, and Egypt, you're talking about this. Martha, you did several reportings and documentaries. Perhaps you might have seen a change in terms of public interest concerning what you do. Well, thank you very much, Marianne, and thank you, Seraphie. Thanks for your project, Terra Africa, which was launched recently. It's all about training journalists from various French-speaking and Portuguese-speaking Africa. I took advantage of that. As a result, you really do talk about environmental problems, which are a global issue, because in these last few decades, in our editorial was often about environment. Often it was at the bottom of our agenda, but now it's increasing in importance. So when we train journalists, we train them to deal with all this in a better way. Yes, indeed. I did quite a few reports, and I also carried out investigation on environmental problems. I wouldn't say I've had a huge impact, but at least it is a first step that we've taken. I looked at mines, quarries and mines, and the use of quarries and mines in the south of Côte d'Ivoire. So that's on our frontier with Ghana. In case you don't know it, Côte d'Ivoire, you've got gold virtually everywhere, all over in the center, south, northeast, wherever, and there's a problem today. And it's about gold panning, be it legal or not. So, thanks to my investigation, I went to this area on the front line with Ghana on a river that's called Bia. So all these gold panners, who they wash in this water, which not only irrigates the plantations and the agriculture, but it's also used by households. And this water is polluted. It's been nearly 5 years now that this problem has existed. Naturally, at a local level, there is a public outcry, but the government seems to be ignoring it. A lot of laxism. So my investigation, I think, did wake up the Ministry of Environment, because when it was broadcast the following week, I was called, my editorial staff was called up, and then there was a delegation of a Ministry of Environment who went to Ghana to talk about this problem, so that the gold panning be done also on the Ghana side, because the two localities are face to face on the same river. So they have the same problem as we have, and they came to an understanding to try and solve this problem because of mercury. Mercury is a very toxic, poisonous problem according to the WHO, and it shouldn't be used. You mean no one would have taken any interest if you hadn't done your broadcast? I wouldn't have said no one, because there had been other articles that were written on this whole area, but in certain other localities in the north, as it so happens, on the same problem, nothing happened. So it's spoken about, but thanks to what I did, perhaps there was a larger outcry. We're not going to stop there, because when you start off something like this, especially if you're denouncing injustice, it's to ensure that there's some kind of a decision that's taken and that there's a problem solving. So you have to find other channels also to make what we're saying known in order to count for more. Okay, so now I'll just give the floor to Raha. So 2 years ago, you launched Climate School in Cairo, and we might have a few figures. Can you give us the slide that was provided by Rahma with all the main key figures that you have of Climate School, or you just tell us about them?
Ce n'est pas ça.
No, that's not it. Those look like bananas, but it was a good try. Anyway, tell us, what's the climate school? Good afternoon. So, the School of Climate, or Climate School, it's been around for 2 years. I launched it because it was our conviction that we needed to provide coverage on climate conditions. There's not one single strategy to use, but many, to make sure that we can offer viable media coverage, such as somewhat similar to what Katia said this morning. We need to try and reach different areas within the community with topics, in each case, suitable to the audience. So you want science-based information, but which is something that people can understand, but without dumbing down. It needs to be scientifically viable. We want to democratize the information, but by doing that, you need a huge amount of knowledge. This is what we do in our school, where we help, therefore, journalists who express an interest in climate change. We help them by giving them scientific knowledge, but also terminology. We give them a scientific glossary. We offer them open source data so that these can be relayed by them and hold appeal to certain audiences. This could be gender, environmental justice, climate change. So we offer training courses about climate change, podcasts. We organize training courses on investigative journalism. So this array of approaches means that our content is varied, is diverse, and really our objective is to make sure that journalists in the Arab-speaking world are independent, so that they can create their content and they could plead for combating climate change, particularly people who are vulnerable communities to the effects of climate change. So how many journalists then? How many hours of training do you offer? Can you give us the numbers over that 2-year period since the inception of your school? Right, so over these last 2 years, we've organized 20 sessions, free of charge, open to anybody who wants to attend those programs. There were no conditions, there were no strings attached. It was an open door. And we organized a competition right across the Arab-speaking world. We had 2 winners, one from Yemen, one from Egypt. We also published their work, and we handed out an award. We have 5 partnerships with local and regional institutions. We've invested in these training courses, as you'd expect. Everything was free of charge. As I said, we were helped by volunteers, help us to structure these training courses and organize them. So we bring out reports. We want them to be of the highest quality possible. We put together a WhatsApp group, a Facebook group, over which we publish what we do. Monthly, weekly bulletins. And thus far, 600 journalists across the Arab world have gone through our hands, also from Africa. We work with Eco-Friendly Africa, an African undertaking. We offer training courses in English as well. We have English-speaking trainers, therefore, and journalists. And so we extended the scope of the beneficiaries of these training courses. Meantime, in Morocco, you raise awareness. There's a book, in fact, that you wrote. What's the book about? It's called Social Urgency, Climate Change, Morocco. That's the title. This emerges from work we did with young people in Open Shabab. That was the name of the program. Open and young people as a translation, to get young people learning about climate change in an inclusive fashion. So we train young people in journalistic techniques, storytelling, investigation, podcast, shooting videos. It was funded in 2018, but it still exists today. And with these young people, we did grassroots work. We initiated them in environmental topics, particularly where the climate is linked in with social urgency. We worked with Eastern Morocco nomads. Because of climate change, these people have to become sedentary. And also the oases that are disappearing. And this is a buttress against the encroachments of the desert in Morocco. There's also urban pollution. Look at Casablanca, for example. We worked on biodiversity, the mafia of cedar trees, mafias that are decimating a fabulous ecosystem in the cedars in the Atlas Mountains, and also algae, marine algae, and the fisheries are destroying that marine diversity off Morocco's coast. So we talk about this in the book, but we've done more this year. We've opened a Open Shabab linked to the environment and getting these young journalists working in conjunction with civil society actors to do cross-media content. There'll be written, podcast, and video content, the goal of which is to work in conjunction with independent grassroots players, having them work with journalists, because those are the profiles that we need to work with. It's those profiles that will tell us what's going on the ground, and we can find grassroots solutions, because in the countries of the south, public authorities, from an environmental perspective, really they're based in the capital, Rabat for us. By ignoring solutions, ignoring complaints, ignoring solutions that are developed locally in these various outlying areas. So we try to have an umbrella solution for offering media coverage to make sure that these social emergencies can emerge in the public space. And we can be very proud. For example, this book had enjoyed some media coverage and public debate. That's what really matters. These topics should prompt a public debate, because once you've got something in the public fora, you can talk about it. You can talk about solutions as well as the problems. And this is the beginning of mindfulness and raising awareness. So young people you involved. What age bracket? Are these urbanites, Rabat, Casablanca, based, for example, or are you reaching young people in the hinterland? Well, we've got young people right across the country, from little towns in Morocco, from Fez, from Rabat and Casablanca, but mainly from the hinterland. And these young people bring with them their own skill sets, because they know what's going on climate-wise in their vicinity, which is great for us, very valuable for us as offering information. And we want to make sure that this information hits the mark for combating climate change. What's their age bracket, though? Well, the last cohort were under 25. And so when you think about these young people and climate change and environmental challenges, what's their mindset? Are they very anxious about the future that is awaiting, or even the future they're already in? Are they very much linked in with these problems? I mean, when they come to you, what's their state of mind? They're mindful of environmental challenges, yes, because just looking at water, that's a major issue in Morocco, water. In Morocco, in the city, sometimes water is just simply dries up or cut off. In rural areas, it's a genuine problem. They're mindful of the fact that intensive farming, intended for European markets or export markets, is a very problem, because 90% of the water that's consumed in Morocco is consumed by intensive farming. So there is a mindfulness, I would say. They're not anxious per se, but what we give them are journalistic techniques. We give them investigative tools and methods. We also give them this possibility of working in conjunction with people who know what's going on in the grassroots level. So it's a solution-based journalistic approach, rather than simply contenting oneself with getting across something simply emotional. No, our approach is more grassroots. And we've got a team of young people who, I can tell you, are properly mindful of these environmental challenges, something that you couldn't see a few years back. But today, it's a generation which is really rising up to the mark, taking up to the mark. And we're proud of supporting them to make sure that Morocco in the future will be at least just as nice, in inverted commas, as the Morocco that we grew up in. With your book, you went into the schools, I think, quite considerably to talk about climate justice. So these are young people, if I can put it that way. And so these people, how do they perceive these issues? It's very important for us to go into the schools and go into universities as well in the open shower movement, because we go off with this book with our teaching aid. The environment is very much part and parcel of what we want to talk about with feminism, femininity, female inequality, invisible work, child workers, labor, precariousness, all that is rolled into what we want to deal with. But this is our teaching aid, so they know where things stand today. And we do that also with upper secondary school students, because we think this is a seed that needs to be planted very early. Now, we do this with what we've got at our fingertips. I mean, we're just a publishing house at the end of the day, so we have a citizen-based approach, but there's only me and my partner who shares my convictions. So it's really, like Don Quixote and the windmills, but it does have an impact on people, and the more you sow the seeds, the more you will see a change bloom. You also see advocacy with public authorities so that they grapple with these matters and that it becomes written into what's taught in schools. And so children basically very quickly be confronted with environmental matters in outreach programs, for example. And then public authorities, perhaps I can finish on that note, during COVID, they showed that they really could be impactful with raising awareness at a large scale. So what we're asking them is that they do exactly the same thing, but this time with the environment. Thanks very much. Let me return to you, Mart. Earlier on, you talked about Terra Africa very quickly. That's the training that you follow to better understand and better get across environmental matters, and particularly injustices there too. So what did you learn in those training courses? What was your starting point? What was your understanding of these matters initially? And very tangibly, how do you learn to grapple with these matters? With Terra Africa, this was launched in March last in Côte d'Ivoire and involves a number of African French-speaking countries: Senegal, Guinea, the Guinea Republic, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Cap Verde. The objective really is to train journalists on environmental issues. Now if journalists, we don't know the basic fundamental nuts and bolts in this very specific area, we can't get across what needs to be got across. So with Terra Africa, we started off by offering training courses revolving around the fundamentals of the environment, inviting experts, as you'd expect, environmental experts, but also experts from the International Climate Change Panel. Now, this body obviously produces reports to raise flags, but it's very important that we understand what these reports say. What do they say? What's the content of these reports? And as journalists, we need to be able to know how to produce reports, investigations that are focused on solutions. Because, I can tell you, I was involved very much in investigative journalism. Now, things aren't right. We can all agree on that. That's the right dynamic. But, everybody may die. It's true. But, I mean, this is a hard-nosed reality. But you can say that, but you need to also say that people can adapt with local initiatives. And we need to talk about that. This is what solution-based journalism is all about. And in my organization, we teach fundamental methods. This project is running into next year as well, with that particular focus. Hopefully it will span 5 years. It's very important to grapple with these environmental issues in African countries. Anyways, we learn these basic journalistic, solution-based journalism, as it were. And I got involved as well. I mean, I did a report on manioc liquid in Côte d'Ivoire. Our national dish is the tieke. So that's a manioc that's cooked, steam cooked. You have to grind the manioc, and that will extract the liquid, and the liquid then is chucked out of your front door. But that is a pollutant. It's an air pollutant. It draws mosquitoes and therefore malaria that balloons in the vicinity. So I did a report with a small team, a young person who decided to collect this liquid to turn it into fuel. So there's an eco-transition, and there's a circular economy idea. And this is a solution-based journalistic example. So we can use that example, so in other areas where women are using cheke, to make sure that the manioc liquid is not thrown out simply into the street, draws in mosquitoes, and fosters the spread of malaria. So we can produce fuel. It can help people in the vicinity, but also people in broader communities. And this technology has proved its worth. This young person who dreamt up this idea is now looking at how possibly there could be petrol stations with that fuel, but it stays, it's a bit on paper for the time being. But the fact that he's been asked to think about how he could receive funding or how he could receive support in that approach, that's very important. And that's really thanks to Sojo. Isham talked about solution-based journalism. Mart, that approach then, does it mean that you're relaying any old initiative to your public to say, this is great? Well, it's not promotional, yeah? We're not promoting, we're not standing on a soapbox and selling anything. We're not talking about heroes. No. Basically, it's to acknowledge that there are initiatives out there, local initiatives, or even nationwide ones, that are used to adapt to climate change and combat climate change, and that can be used to live long as how we wish to live. It's not drawing the limelight or bringing into the limelight some sort of a hero who jumped up on an idea. No, it's basically all about how to help a locality, a region, or a nation to cope. So it's not good news evangelism journalism. Say, oh, we found it. This is a magic wand. That's brilliant. You can also do investigations on solutions that weren't successful. That's also solution-based journalism. And Terra Africa teaches us to talk about that as well through CFI. So in Egypt, then, do you also do solution-based journalism? I know that you've done a number of journalist reports, some of which were impactful and had a tangible effect. But can you tell us basically how you work as a journalist to conduct your investigations, to do reports on environmental injustices? I like solution-based journalism because for me, it's true that we're lacking outreach work, raising awareness in respect of the environment and what's actually happening now. Today, as journalists, we must help local people so that they can adapt as far as possible to the climate situation, to how things currently stand with the environment. Now, Marcia, you were saying, do we do advocacy or do we advertise initiatives? Well, no. When we see that there is an initiative that may have an impact, a genuine impact, well, then we help them get heard.
So something to give them the courage to carry on in their investigation. So that's what I'm trying to do in all my investigations. Lately in Egypt, I had worked on female farmers in Egypt. They were trained for 3 days concerning certain agricultural methods which would be more planet friendly. So they underwent this 3-day training, and as a result, they've acquired a new skill set, not just to improve their lives and what they're doing, but also the utility of their involvement in women actually playing a role and getting used to this new reality with climate change. So apart from climate challenge, we are also helping these women. So in the final analysis, everybody who's involved, everybody who's in this adaptation with climate change are working together to make a real difference, to make it really impactful. That's what we mentioned in a report that we published. And particularly in an impactful report, which was something we'd done with Arij. As a result, I'd started working in the field of environment and environmental journalism. I hadn't imagined it like this when I first started. I thought at the time that it wasn't related to everyday life of ordinary citizens, and how wrong I was, because this has a direct impact on the local population, for instance. For instance, factories that produce cement. You've got homes and residences which are not very far from these factories. And so the local population in that area is likely to suffer from cancer and other sorts of disease, and maybe child death, or perhaps even a higher rate of mortality amongst the adults. So all that this population that has to endure, and the local environment also has had to endure, led to a sort of mobilization in order to stop this kind of industrial activity in populated areas. In fact, they went to court and there was a court decision that was taken. So we work on this. We've been working on it for 2 years and it's extremely impactful and we have come up with practical results. So your investigations on these cement-making factories have had an impact because some of them were shut down, and you were able to see what the actual result was of your work. You saw that immediately. You saw the results. Marthe, did you, in your investigations outside of Ghana, did you see some kind of impact? Has it had a reach? Has it led to shutdowns, campaigns, awareness? Can you measure the impact of your work? Now, concerning some of the work I did on environment, I also I work in the field of health because I feel that health and environment go together. But without the environment, we cannot really exist. And if your environment is sick, then you're sick yourself. There's no health. Yes, so as far as health is concerned, yes, I've had an impactful reach, fairly impactful. I know that because I did one in prisons with prison detainees, and I was interviewed by Brut Afrique, and I saw the director here in this conference. She doesn't know me personally, but I do know her. So I was doing this reporting, and actually the entire net in Côte d'Ivoire went mad. They were shocked to see how women had to manage to protect themselves when they had their periods. Uh, in fact, since they're overpopulated, it can lead to all kinds of sickness and disease, and this had a huge impact on the net that we had. And so things are changing, the lines are changing, and I think I'm really delighted to know that there's a delegation now coming from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Justice for Women's Rights are trying now to provide hygienic kits for women. Let's not forget our colleagues also who are looking also for help. There's the diaspora also that's helping us, giving us a relay to be better heard. Now, about the environment, not really. I did an investigation on a little village called Asoreti, and it was one of the World Heritage capitals. And this village is stuck between a lagoon and the sea. And the population over there will soon disappear because they don't know where to go because of the shutting down of the mouth of the lagoon. It's really blocked, and it's been several years that this problem has existed. So the government keeps talking about work and so on, but so far the local population doesn't know where to sleep when it rains because it's all flooded out. And I wouldn't say that my reporting on this had a real impact. But we do publish everything that we do in cooperation with other NGOs, and that's why I'd like to thank Terre Africa for what they've done, because they put us in contact with researchers and with other NGOs. So the aim is to find some understanding, some comprehension between all our organizations so that our journalists don't just disappear and turn into a dead letter. We work hard and then we feel that nothing's happening, and we don't want that to happen. There has to be a follow-up and there has to be an impact. Whereas if we work with these NGOs, they can use all the work that we've done and carry out their advocacy. So as a journalist, we'll become, I suppose, activists or militants in a way, because if we We also wish to defend the rights of our population through what we are doing. It is to denounce injustice and to make sure that justice be carried out. We must write and we must make sure it's not a dead letter. It should be read and it should have an impact. And this is, of course, thanks to all the NGOs who can do the advocacy for us. That's the stage that I've gotten to make what I'm doing better known by having press conferences where I invite NGOs and the local population and everyone around, and to present the results of all I'm doing in public. I'm afraid we will have to now move on to the next step. There are workshops going on. Thank you all very much, and thanks for this roundtable between all of you. Any quick questions, perhaps?
I am a fact check editor at the Cable in Nigeria. I'm also a climate fact checker. I would like to ask that in the process of doing your work, how much has climate-related disinformation, affected the progress in terms of climate crisis, ensuring that people have the right information about the climate crisis? How much has information affected your work or the general work across the globe? Thank you.
Qui veut répondre?
Who'd like to answer? Yes, Isham. Just like all African news, with environment, there's an additional chapter because there's a vested interest with the economic groups. And the environmental issue as such is treated as a secondary issue. So very often what we hear is that economy, work, and the ability to find work is more important than environment. There's a sort of competition between them. And then we've got all those skeptics, who feel that climate is really not so important and who push this narrative differently. So the fact-checking is extremely important to face up to this sort of opposition that we run into. And investigation is extremely important because that's what tells us where the truth lies, and it also shows the relevance of a real environmental policy and a real awareness of environmental challenges that have an impact on the population. So just to sum up, I'd say that just like for all the other fields, environment is also just full of fake news, and fact checkers are extremely important in this operation of restituting the truth. Any other reactions? Quickly around from our panelists? No? Yes? Rahma? No? Yes, another question. Thank you. Divri Anderson. I'm a journalist in Ivory Coast. I think it's Rahma. She mentioned cement works, which is in a residential area. And I think there was a massive mobilization, but you didn't really tell us in detail what happened. Tell us what happened, because I think it's at the very heart of your panel subject, how to fight against environmental injustice. We, as media, we produce information, be it reporting or inquiries, etc. But the idea is to contribute towards change for a better tomorrow. So how do you fight? In your case, your cement works is very interesting. Can you tell us exactly what you did? How did you manage to create the change? And to come back to our Marthe and what she said towards the end, you said we must improve collaboration or cooperation between NGOs and researchers. Yes, that's true. So all the inquiries and all the investigation can have a desired result. In Côte d'Ivoire, we find that all the work we do doesn't really have a fruitful effect. It's very frustrating because we carry out the investigation ourselves. We undertake a lot of risks. We spend a lot in time and energy and resources, all that for nothing. So in an earlier panel, we were asked, are you not becoming militants finally and not being a journalist? So now I feel that if you don't commit yourself, if you don't become militant, how do you change things? And then finally, it's after the finances take over, and then it's the politician who take over, and so on and so forth, And then you're pursued, you're fined in court, prosecuted. I worked, for instance, on a real estate scandal where the government had actually cheated the local population, 11,000 square meters that were given off to a Belgian company to do what they wanted to. Now, there was a lot of pressure in that area. I managed to publish a report, but nothing happened. So what happened? We spoke to all the Belgians in the French-speaking areas, NGOs, etc. We created a consortium, and of course, my media was part of it. And these NGOs actually extended the advocacy in Europe. There was a lot of pressure then. There was a petition, a lot of lobbying, and there were demonstrations. The NGOs really went at it. And then the director, because the population just couldn't talk to the director or the manager who was there in situ. So finally, it was the CEO of the company who had to go himself to Côte d'Ivoire. So you see, you have to be militant. And of course, we have to maintain respect of our ethical code, and you have to obey the rules. Now, once it happens, how do you have this impact? And then you must be helped. It has to be advocated. It has to be pled for all over. So my question is, at Rahma, how did you create this change with the example of cement works? Because it's very evocative. We've had those problems also. There's also cement works that work in areas where you're being told you shouldn't really be there, and they do it, and then there's pollution, and that's injustice. That's injustice. And how do you deal with it? How do you create change? Well, sometimes some of the investigation doesn't give you any result directly, and that only helps later. The impact might be invisible to start with, but it's there. It's there. Maybe there'll be a greater awareness of some of the rights of people living in these sensitive areas, and they would know that they have the right to fight for what's happening to them and not just suffer. And how do we make sure that our reports actually help this to be more impactful? There's several things that can help us. For instance, we went to several areas and we mapped most of the kind of cement works, and we took photos also of homes and residential areas of people suffering because of the impact of these factories and their daily suffering as such. So to finance all these reports, which are using very developed means, is of course a must. We must be able to get the funding. We get the local communities also to be involved with us. They do the investigation with us. We do reports in English also to have a wider reach, a greater scope in terms of readers in the Arabic-speaking area. If there's no translation, it'll go unknown, and there's a lot of people who will not read it. Sometimes, of course, we have to publish all that we write in more than one language. There was a project called Media Bridge, and we wrote it just in Arabic, and then it was translated in Germany with a German newspaper. So it's this kind of funding that would help us and which would really provide us with the means, or perhaps other foundations and NGOs who lend their support to our kind of work. And that's what will make it more impactful and bring in the change. Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Good afternoon. Ilyas Abdullah. I'm a journalist from Kurdistan, Iraq Iraq-speaking Kurdistan, Iraqi speaking. When you carry out all your investigations based on environment, are you persecuted by the local authorities or by the government? Because sometimes all the owners of such factories and such sites have political clout and they are all powerful. Very often these owners are very, very powerful. And concerning some of the oil wells, which have the vested interests of the state also. Have you ever run into such circumstances where you encounter obstacles? Perhaps you're persecuted outright by the government. Yes, sometimes there are attempts to shut us up, or that they don't provide us with the information, they choke it off. For instance, they don't react to us. These cement works, for instance. We tried to force them to answer us because we have the right to an answer, but they refuse to communicate. They just wouldn't provide us with an answer. Yes, of course we run into problems. And we try to adjust as best as we can and just keep moving on, just valiantly carry on, because you do know that working conditions are different in our country and difficult, but you know that. Personally, I was not persecuted. I haven't run into this sort of problem. I wasn't in danger, nor was my family endangered. It all depends. If you work, for instance, on mines and quarries, that whole field is an issue. In Morocco, for instance, the mines belong to a huge company called Managem. And there are sometimes strikes, people working over there, or the neighboring, in the vicinity, all the people who live there. Because when land is confiscated by the state and changes the ecosystem of a whole region, it creates issues. So we try to have people, our inside workers, because it's the people who are involved over there who help us to carry out our investigation. That's extremely important, as Rahma said. The risk or the fact that an accusing finger is pointed at you, it's not physically done to us, but you can be boycotted. We're not physically harmed, but you're blacklisted, and there's pressure that's imposed on you. And I do believe that with these journalistic techniques, and as I was saying, you have to do proper, genuine investigative work, work with the local population. That's what matters.
C'est sur les enquêtes.
So this means that you can become safe in respect of tricky events. I haven't suffered any threats when there was the gold panning using mercury, but it's very sensitive in Côte d'Ivoire because the panning is also done illegally by companies or in a shoddy fashion. Now, I didn't receive threats, but it's more the problem was access to info because the local inhabitants didn't want to speak to us. So to have people speak, it was very tricky. You had to kind of instill a climate of trust to do so. But the government shut down information. Nothing came out. We sent several letters, we rang. Even though we're a public interest media, normally we can access everything within the authorities, but it was very difficult to tap into any information, to have just simply an interview, to shed light on how things stood. And ultimately, I managed to do so, but it's very tricky. But just look at other colleagues who did receive threats. They were dealing with mining, for example. Perhaps somebody can talk about this, I don't know. But in Simili, which is in the northeast of Côte d'Ivoire, that's a village which is very much polluted. Farming has been damaged. The soil is contaminated by a manganese company that has been operating since 2006. and its permit was renewed in 2008. But there was bribery at play. Really, bribery changed hands. There was a colleague who investigated this. He was threatened, and the village filed a complaint against the Côte d'Ivoire state for negligence in 2021 before the Council of Europe Human Rights Judicial Authority. This case is pending. There are journalists who have threatened, not true of me, but when you talk about mining, these are tricky matters, and it's difficult to get information or hear from victims of injustice because they're frightened, these people, and that's the problem.
Merci à tous. Il est bientôt 15.
So it's almost 3:15. A round of applause, please. Thank you very much, Marianne, for moderating. Thanks to all of you on the rostrum.